Greetings, everyone. My name is Joshua Johnson, and I want to talk to you today about learning management systems. This presentation is meant to be a bird's eye view, an overlook as to what a learning management system is going to do, what maybe are the most common uses of a learning management system, in hopes that you can, as you are thinking about your course and delivering a course in either a face-to-face and online or a blended high-flex environment, you can think about what the primary function of this learning management system is going to be for you in your course. So, first of all, I just want to talk about the learning management system in general. They've been around in some form or function for 30 to 40 years now in education. Probably one of the most well-known learning management systems is Blackboard. Canvas is currently one of the fastest growing learning management systems, and second largest at the moment, second or third, is Moodle. You'll hear other words like D2L, Sakai, Talent LMS, even our MyWLC or Genzabar e-learning is just one of the hundreds of examples of learning management systems. They're used not even primarily by educational institutions, but are used by corporations in general in order to do training as well as assess different growth and objectives for that training throughout the different fields. Healthcare and technology remain two of the bigger areas where learning management systems are used outside of education. So the thing about a learning management system, and I put a question mark here, technology is sometimes referred to as the new chalk. When we're teaching in a high flex or a blended or online format, we very often don't have the traditional whiteboard available to us. So technology is what we use as the chalk. Now, there's some beautiful things about chalk and chalkboards. They're easy to use. You know that if you can see the piece of chalk in the chalkboard that it's going to work, right? Even with a marker board, a whiteboard, you don't know if when you take that cap off that marker, if the marker's got any ink left in it. So one of the things that we are still struggling with, and a lot of times it comes down to financial concerns, as well as just the really the capabilities of technology, is trying to get to a point where people don't have to think about how technology works, and instead it just works. That you could walk in to a new 21st century classroom and the things would just work the way that you would intuitively expect them to. When it comes to learning management system, 2016, and I think there's been a more recent one since then, continues to point, research points that students, nearly all students use an LMS, and that it is consistently identified as one of the most important things in most important technologies for their academic success. One of the things that I want to kind of move into, and take this next slide with a grain of salt, is that technology is not going to replace teachers. But I do love this quote from Ray Clifford: teachers who use technology probably are going to replace those who do not. Now, that is not meant to get anybody nervous about somebody's going to come take your job. What I instead hope that it does is that it helps you to maybe motivate you to learn to use some of the technologies, perhaps in new ways, perhaps to make your job a little bit easier, or make you more effective at what you're trying to do in the classroom. The reality is the learning management system has been around a long time, and I put up here this the SAMR model, substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition, that we sometimes use to talk about technology or talk about things in the classroom, like how can I apply technology. I also put up this image that's known as the trough of disillusionment, just to kind of keep the two things really in front of you. I have a feeling that a lot of people, a lot of teachers and faculty members across the country, when learning management systems started to arrive on campus, they were so excited at all the things that they were going to be able to do with it. And then when it doesn't necessarily work out the way that they thought it would, they enter this trough of disillusionment where, well, it doesn't work, so we just are going to not use it. right? And then dedicated people have continued to work and use and refine its use to this point where now we understand what it can do and what it can't. The reality, though, is that the LMS is the used minivan of technology in the classroom. There are a lot of people that are going to look and say, I've never used this, like this is kind of at the pinnacle, and it's not really what it is. The LMS is something that everybody has, and nobody's really ever excited. I shouldn't say nobody. Some people, and myself included, love minivans. They're comfortable. I like the way they drive. I don't own one, but they're not always proud of it, right? And I think that's the case. Everybody looks at their used LMS and says it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that, and this new one does, right? But it still gets the job done. So keep that in mind, as well as one thing. This quote I like to use: I can't teach anyone anything. All I can ask students to do, and all I can really try to make them do, and I can't even make them do it, is get them to think. Right? So keep in mind that whenever we're talking about teaching in these new environments, that technology it absolutely is not going to replace good teaching. But good teaching is probably not what we all encountered as we were growing up and we went through school. Good teaching is maybe not even what we're currently doing. Right? A lot of times we equate the idea of teaching with I am going to tell you and show you, and whatever it is, I'm doing this, almost as something being done to the students, right? And understanding, and I've got up here Bloom's kind of modified taxonomy here. Teaching is about really working with students and getting them to the point where they can kind of do the things that are at the end, the top, the pinnacle, the peak of Bloom's taxonomy, which is analyzing, evaluating, and creating, right? We start with those building blocks and we move towards the very top of that taxonomy. So when we use our learning management system, it's important for us to understand probably what the students expect. Students expect to use a learning management system to check their grades, to download readings or course materials that they're going to need, worksheets that they have to fill out, that they're going to turn in assignments through that learning management system. They're going to be able to access course information and syllabi and dates and meetings through the learning management system, as well as communicate in that system. The way that faculty traditionally use, and when I say traditionally, I don't mean it to sound like this is not the way it should be used. Faculty use learning management systems to organize and distribute those materials that students expect to hand out. Perfect marriage. They use it to collect and grade assignments, and that's where students expect to turn in and receive feedback for assignments. They used it to summarize student progress, usually in the form of the gradebook. It can be used to deliver online quizzes and exams. It can also be used to participate in online discussion forums, and that does cover a lot of the communication needs when we talk with and about our students. The idea for you, as you are planning to learn to use a learning management system, is to make sure that you really think about all of the things that you are going to do before you even touch it. All right, there's a lot of things that go into this. I'm a believer personally in backwards design, where I think about the end goal and I work backwards. What's the goal for students in my course? What is the goal? Leads to, if I know what I'm trying to get my students to be able to do, or to the level that I want my students to be at, then that helps me define how do I assess whether or not they've met that goal. And once I have my assessments defined, I start to think about, now how do I prepare my students for those assessments? And working backwards, then once I know how I want to prepare them, how am I going to deliver that? What am I going to ask students to engage with? So it all kind of works backwards. And you really want to think very hard, especially when you're talking about an online learner or an asynchronous learner, is how are students going to interact with the ideas? How are they going to engage with what's going on in this class? I have a slide here about learning effectiveness, and these are probably just ballpark numbers, but 10% is reading, 20% is listening, 30% is watching. We get into, and I don't understand how these numbers make any sense, other than the fact that they're just adding these things together. 50% is listening and watching, and then 70% speaking. The math in my mind on this slide is mind-boggling. Don't know where it came from, other than the fact that it seems to think that 40% of learning effectiveness is coming through speaking. And that's me trying to, on the spur of the moment, fit these into a Venn diagram. And I know I've accounted for 60% between reading, watching, and listening. That leaves 40% for the other. Don't ask me why the numbers say what they say here, and I'm not quoting any researcher on this. It's just a nice graphic to emphasize the idea. You want students to engage. You want students not just to sit passively and read. Reading wouldn't necessarily be passive, but to listen and watch. But we want them to engage with those things. We want them to write, to speak, to produce. That's at the very top of Bloom's taxonomy, and that idea of we're going to analyze, synthesize, and create. All right, that's the new taxonomy. Creating is at the top. So, how am I going to use my learning management system? In the next slides, I'm going to show you the things that at Wisconsin Lutheran College, we currently have 2 learning management systems, things that should be possible, and the most common uses of the learning management system within a course. Things that will help keep you a little bit more organized, help make it more consistent for students from course to course and professor to professor, and hopefully in some way, when you put the effort in ahead of time, reduce the workload on the back end. By spending the time in building your course digitally, it really makes it a lot easier to reproduce that course and redeliver that course in future semesters. So first of all, start small. Focus on quality. And when we're thinking about things in the learning management system, we want to reduce the clicks. We want to engage students, so we want to try and find ways to use the social features. The big one in an LMS is the discussion forum. We want to be consistent. If we want to have a schedule. I'm going to make a class announcement about the requirements for this week every Sunday night at 5:30 p.m. right? And try to stay on that schedule so that students know when to look and when to engage. And you can have more than just the one time. And then finding ways to let students participate, be a part of that class. So one of the things that I'm going to kind of brush by a little bit, and you can spend a lot of time focusing on this, is you want to try and make things obvious to your students. All right? The way that you design your course, the way that you lay it out, chronologically, going from week to week, the things that you're asking them to do, help students see and understand what am I supposed to do this week in order to engage with this course. Having these weekly goals and these weekly ideas is also essential because in an online course, the only way that you can measure attendance is through engagement. Engagement with the activities that you've assigned and turning in the things that have been that you've asked for. So think of your LMS as kind of the launching pad. This is home base. This is where the classroom, all of the information is. Typically in the regular face-to-face classroom, I come to class because that's where I'm going to get all of my materials. My teacher's going to hand out the syllabus. He's going to give us the assignment. He's going to say all these things. I'm going to take my notes. I'm going to go and then I'm going to do my homework. That's what's going on within the learning management system. You really want to use it to distribute and collect everything. Now, there are some exceptions to this. There are times where, because of some of the tools that your textbook publisher uses and whatnot, that you will have people going into another system in order to do their homework because the textbook has a courseware built in. Or they're going to be interacting in some other way outside of the learning management system. But this is where everything starts, and then it's where everything finishes. This is where the grades are. You summarize, you keep students up to date, you provide the feedback. So keep in mind that it's the launch pad, and try as much as you can to only write everything once. Avoid duplicating information. Don't put the instructions for an assignment in your syllabus and then have those same instructions for your assignment written in the steps for that week, and then have those same instructions written on the actual assignment itself. Because as you duplicate, you are making more work and making it easier for you to have things that don't match 100%. So you want to try as much as you can to have everything in one place, right? When I have instructions for an assignment, my syllabus will say, this is an assignment you're doing. My steps for completion will say, this is an assignment that you're working on this week. The assignment has the instructions. That's where students get it, so I only have to maintain it in one area. But let's take a look at some of those things I talked about before and just highlight where the learning management system really shines. Distribution of materials. Being able to hand out materials, documents. We prefer documents to be in a PDF format. If you're writing a paper or a syllabus in Microsoft Word or the Macintosh counterpart, save it as a PDF. Things that you are distributing to students, try to keep them as PDFs if they are documents that they are supposed to read. Scan things if needed. Try to avoid fillable PDFs. They seem like a great idea. Like, I can create a PDF, it's got the formatting, students fill it out. It can lead to a lot of hassles for students and a lot of frustration for faculty members. But use PDFs where you can. The times not to use a PDF is if I'm providing students with a template in a Word document that they are going to go in and fill out and do whatever. I'll give them the actual document to get them started. But otherwise, PDFs, unless they actually have to write or annotate or do things to it. Bookmarks. Being able to house links to outside sources, whether it's just a website, perhaps it's the online text that your publishing company has, or it's the accompanying courseware that your publishing company uses. A lot of times it's to video content, whether it's video content that you've created or that others have made freely available online, places like YouTube and Vimeo, and we'll talk more about that. Links to your Zoom meetings. This is where my Zoom meeting room is. If we are meeting in a classroom, this is the same link you're going to use every time to get into it, as well as any other outside services that your class may use. One of the big things that always comes into any classroom is the use of video, and video has some concerns. Number one, copyright issues. Fair use, we as educators in our classroom have a lot of leeway under the umbrella of fair use to be able to show DVDs, copyrighted works in our classroom without having to worry about copyright issues. Where you start to see the difference is, yes, I can come into a classroom and I can read you a manuscript and we can go through that. But for me to then instead copy that manuscript, publish it, and distribute it to the entire class, now we start to get into some copyright issues. Most people will recognize that and use the 10% rule. Like, you can copy 10% of a work and distribute that for use in your classroom. But beyond that, you really need to get permission. When you're talking about video content that is not video content you created and is copyrighted, and especially is commercially available, you really are not able to distribute that in an online format. Even if it is password protected in your LMS, it's not acceptable. The problem is that it is a gray area. And so a lot of people are going to say, well, if I can show it in my classroom, I need to be able to show it when my students are online. Some of the gray area there, or some of the other things that even if you take the copyright out, and we'll talk about solutions in a second, is that even if I had permission to do it, the file size of converting video is just too big. It's too big for me to email. It's too big for me to upload to the LMS and have students click on it. So what we end up doing quite often to kind of alleviate some of those concerns is, for copyright, request permission. You may not get it. You can also, but you're in this gray area now, share these things privately via some sort of online sharing service or file sharing service like Google Drive or Dropbox. I believe the college at Wisconsin Lutheran College is going to be looking at sharing or giving Dropbox accounts to faculty member. You could share it that way, where people have the ability to view the file, but not download it and not keep it. You could also alleviate the size limitations by the same thing. Google Drive and Dropbox have much larger limitations on size. You can put the video there, make a link to that video, and share the link. Other services, if these are things that you create, like the video I'm creating here, you could use services like YouTube or Vimeo because you can get around the size limitation. Plus, they play well in every type of device. And that's why I picked Google Drive and Dropbox. When you share those links, students don't have to download this huge file in order to play it. They can play it right off the internet. So copyright's a big one. You really want to think of alternatives for copyrighted and commercial works. Other ideas about doing this will come up a little bit later. But distributing other things like PowerPoint files, keep in mind that a good slideshow should really be, and I say should, it should be useless without the presenter. Now, I'm breaking some of my own rules about slideshows simply for the sake of time. In my opinion, there is too much text on this slide right here. The slideshow should be there to support the person presenting, not be the focal point of the presentation. So keep in mind that when you share your PowerPoint, students will also need to have access to a program that is going to be able to open that PowerPoint. Now, things are becoming a little bit more ubiquitous, but many students are not using PCs and Macs. They may be using their phones, tablets, Chromebooks that cannot open the PowerPoint because they don't have the necessary software installed and cannot install it in some cases on these devices. So linking a PowerPoint in Dropbox is good, or converting that PowerPoint into a video like the one that I'm doing now is probably a better option, because now you have the presentation along with the slides, and you can still publish the PowerPoint or the handout that goes with it if you would like, but that is a great option. And one of the ways to do that is to use Zoom, which is the software we have chosen at Wisconsin Lutheran College in order to communicate with students in one-to-one, face-to-face webinar style meetings. You can record that PowerPoint presentation all by yourself, or you can record it while you're presenting to students in your class. One of the other main things about an LMS is collecting and grading assignments. And we're going to have a long discussion, and probably one that is going to shake up a little bit of the ways that you think about what grading, what assessment, what evaluating is when it comes to student performance. And that's for another day. But right here, I just wanted to be able to talk about some of the functionalities. Think of your LMS as an expanded syllabus. Your syllabus probably outlines the overall assignments that you're going to use and maybe how they're going to be graded to a certain extent. Those grades are going to be stored within your LMS. The assignments collected there, the grades given there. So it's all kind of works together. You don't have to collect the work and grade it and give it back to students and then go somewhere else and put the grade in. All those things can happen in one place. It's a great place to put in the assignment instructions, the due dates. You can also, as far as the LMS, think of the expanded syllabus to include things like your contact information, the times you're available, your office hours. Syllabi are always subject to change. You can modify these things as you go. But many of the types of assignments that people will use in an LMS are papers, presentations, audio files, images, all these things that students create and they upload right into the LMS. The assignment is going to probably include instructions from the professor, as well as any necessary files to distribute that correspond directly, perhaps a blank rubric so they see what the scoring is going to be based on. It's also where a lot of the grading, the evaluating, the feedback can happen right within that assignment. This replaces, and I say this because I heard so many people in this last semester talk about the flood of emails with students emailing them assignments. I don't accept students' assignments to be emailed. If a student emails me an assignment, I kindly ask them, will you please put this in the LMS at this location? That way it's all in one place for me, and it helps me keep track of timeliness and all those other things in grading, and I don't have to be keeping track of 1,000 emails. So learning to use the LMS in order to do that is huge. You can also do assignments that require students to participate in online discussions. It's important, if you're going to use online discussions, to talk about whether or not in-class students have to do it, as well as define how you're assessing these. And you should define that even for in-class participation. How am I assessing your in-class discussion? Most people will assess these things in an online format based on the content, the delivery of that content, and the timing. And that could cover, depending on your area and what your focus is, the delivery could cover grammar and punctuation. The content is really, is it applicable and are you furthering this conversation? Timing might be, did you do this on time? Are you participating when I'm asking you to? Those are big ones. I have my own opinions about timing, but I will save those for the assessment discussion. Quizzes and exams. LMSs are great at closed response. They're a great replacement for Scantron. It automatically grades and scores students. They can be used for open-ended questions as well. Typically, those require you to manually grade them, but they're still a great choice for being able to do this. And it allows you, in both cases, or in most LMSs, it allows you to create question banks, to use time limits, to vary and give people additional time if required, as well as randomize questions if that's the way you choose, perhaps even randomizing the letter choices between the questions. All of those things can be done. It is also possible, and I know Wisconsin Lutheran College is looking into online proctoring services to help proctor the exams for you, because cheating remains as one of the biggest concerns. Again, I have a lot of things to say about this on the topic of assessment. We'll save those for another day. Work that's done in other formats, I'll use examples like files that are too large, video presentations that students recorded. Perhaps you had students join together in a Zoom meeting to work collaboratively, and you want evidence of that Zoom meeting and what happened in it. You might ask for a memo or the minutes from the meeting. You may even ask students to record the Zoom meeting and publish or share it with you. Many of those are going to be too big. Work created in other programs. There's many online music creation programs where you really can't share a file. Like the music maybe isn't the thing. It's the created work, and it has to be viewed in this program. So a lot of times programs or other types of formats will give you the ability to share that via some sort of link. If this exists online, they can share the link to that work. And in most cases, they can define privacy settings to say only people who have this link can view it. Otherwise, you might want to be creative. Think about using screenshots. If you're asking students to do homework on paper because they're writing things out and doing math, using a camera on their cell phone to snap a picture of it, all viable options. Some other things to think about when it comes to discussion forums, you can share those links in a discussion forum. Sometimes the presentation, the group presentation that was recorded in video, is meant to be given to the entire class. Record it, link to it in a discussion forum where the whole class can view. Otherwise, students can paste these things and paste the web link or the screenshots onto a Word document and upload it that way. In some cases, I know with Moodle, I've not found this with my WLC, you can use a type of an assignment submission known as an online text submission, where they can just write in or copy and paste the link. The next part about summarizing student progress really is going to talk about the gradebook. My advice is to be transparent. Understand and define your point or your grading scheme. Many of our gradebooks, but not all, operate on point values, where assignments are given weights or assignments are given points and are scored out of that many points. My plea is for people to really truly think and understand the weight of a 0 on our grade scales. Think about the bucket sizes. A's are from 90 to 100, B's are from 80 to 90, C's from 70 to 80, D's 60 to 70. Then all of a sudden we get to F. And F has a bucket size that is 6 times larger than any of those other weights. So understanding that 0 and being sure you are using it in a way that matches your philosophy of assessment and education. But just be aware of it. Just think about it. I would also say with that is you want to make sure that you are assessing the work. If you are using an online gradebook, typically by default, they say if assignment is not submitted, we don't count it in the grade unless you specifically ask us to do so. So what that means is I could have 10 assignments and Johnny handed in the first assignment, got an A on it, but didn't hand in the next 9. Most grade books will still show him at a 100% because they are only basing the grade on the work completed. So keep in mind that if you are using a grade book, many times you have to define whether or not you want that to happen. The caveat is if I tell a grade book to include empty grades, if I have 10 assignments in my grade book on day 1 with 0 work submitted by anyone, everyone starts at a 0%. And so it kind of is like working towards a percentage. Instead of showing you how you are doing with the work you've done so far, it's really showing you how much further do you have to go until you meet the minimum requirements for passing. Again, there's a right and a wrong time to use both of those ideas, I think. Neither is perfect. If I want a student to recognize that they haven't done this, and as of right now they have a failing grade for it, I personally have to put in that failing grade. I usually do that to try and keep it up to date and then to remind students, hey, this is overdue. Let's get these things done. This is what your grade looks like without it. Assignments in LMSs that are created typically have grade points assigned to them, or you can assign the grade points right to that assignment. So you don't have to create an assignment in your LMS and then create a grade book for your LMS. You create the assignment, a grade is attached to it. When they turn it in that area, you can score it. It automatically goes in your grade book. What's important then for most people is to understand the calculations. How are you grading? And is it doing what you really think it is? That's where really the most important thing I can tell people is if you are concerned about the way that your grade book is calculating grades, to have a conversation with a veteran user of that LMS or myself so we can take a look and say, oh yeah, you've got the right idea. Using category weights, weighting individual assignments, all of those things start to get into kind of advanced uses of the gradebook. And sometimes those conversations lead people to rethink the way that they're structuring their gradebook to make it as transparent as possible to students so it's easy to understand. Another thing that I'd really want to recommend is if you have a textbook, talk to your textbook publisher. Email your representative. Find out if there is online courseware options and if they are available with the purchase of the textbook or if they are something that has to be purchased separately. Many times the online courseware includes the textbook with it, and there may be some services within there that you could use to help facilitate and direct your course. At the very least, find out if your textbook has pre-made test banks and or exam creating software. One of the most time-consuming things to do in an LMS is to create the online exam. To take the thing that I have in Word and copy and paste all of those questions and then put in the choices for the answers and mark which one is right. It's a lot of work up front. It can pay off huge in the long run because when you define those questions within your LMS, you're basically creating a question bank. I personally recommend talking to your textbook publisher, finding out if they have pre-made banks of questions that you could use and select from, ones that help measure your goals, as well as the software that allows you to add your own questions. Using that software will greatly reduce the amount of time it takes to import questions or pre-made assessments into your LMS, and can also print out pre-formatted paper versions for those in class. A couple other ideas: discussion forums. Most discussion forums have subscription options. You can use them for more than just class assignments. I use discussion forums for class-wide announcements. I don't email students, I post them in the forums because the forum I posted in requires all students to be subscribed, and it emails them when I post. I mentioned before scheduling a post like that. I post on Monday mornings and usually Wednesday afternoons, and the usual is my own just kind of not always getting to it. But I tell students to expect that so they know to look in their email. I post it in the forums because then even if it gets lost in the email, students can go right to the course and the communication is there. It's also a great place for students' questions and answers, and I'm always ecstatic when a student asks a question. And a lot of times they're early in the course and another student says, "Oh, I had that same problem. Here's how I fixed it." Let students work together, a great way to have them participate. Also, questions that students ask in the middle of a class are typically loud and are typically spoken, and the entire class can hear. Other students benefit from seeing and reading the response to that question. Some forums can be set up that students have to respond before they are allowed to view other student responses, which is great for forums where you want to know what does each student think, and I want you to tell me what you got out of this, not just parrot all of the information that everybody else said first. They're also really beneficial to use to precede class discussions and also recap them. So you can have the students before class on Monday, you have to fill out and write a 2-paragraph response to this. Use that so you can set students up for success in the class by highlighting some of the responses that were given and maybe using those responses as already kickstarting that conversation. My biggest piece of advice with discussion forums, though, is to beware of fatigue. It is so much more work for both you and your students to have to communicate solely by written communication. So keep that in mind. Again, less is more. Instead of having a lot of little discussions, focus on the big ideas. Let them tackle a topic for multiple weeks and ask for them to write, however much you expect for them to write to participate in that. Otherwise, you can really get into courses that have multiple discussion forums and students just become fatigued and then start looking for shortcuts. So just beware of that. Really the last topic I want to talk about is communication. Whether it's because of assessment or just throughout the course, the big thing with communication is providing feedback for students in the variety of ways that are available to you. Feedbacks on assignments, announcements, whatever it is, emails to students. Provide feedback and be consistent. Make your announcements scheduled. And remember, our generation, me personally especially, I live inside my email inbox. That's not where students live. That's not where students communicate. So keep in mind, it is still the expectation in most businesses and professional settings that email communication take place, but students aren't living there and checking it all the time. So we are training students to do that, but we also have to understand that they're not going to be in it quite as much as we are. which is why making sure that I announce to them, like, you all to check your email on Monday mornings, Wednesday afternoons. That's when your announcements are going to come. I think training them to at least check their email once every 24 hours, and helping them understand you don't necessarily need to reply to all of the things. Some require response, so make sure that you respond in a timely manner. But that also means we as faculty need to do the same thing. I tell students that I will check their email. I'll get back within 24 hours on weekdays, but over the weekend, I really don't check email. I turn it off and it's done. I will occasionally, because I start to feel guilty and panicky, I'll check it, but over the weekends, I inform my students, and you don't have to do this, I inform my students that they can reach me via my cell phone, text me, let me know who they are, and if they need to have a conversation now, or if it's just something to be aware of. That's the way that they do it, and most people never pick up the phone to do that. I mean, I'll get a couple throughout the semester. Zoom is a great communication tool. It's the one that's being adopted by WLC. Even in your lecture, to use the chat feature for students to write up questions and even have back channel conversations if in the middle of the class discussion is an excellent option. I'll point out a tool referred to as Slack. It's an amazing little tool. It's one that we are considering or have considered WLC. We just don't have the ability to integrate it at this time, but it's an alternative form of communication. I usually say for the informal things. I use Slack as just a supplement to my office hours. It is not required for any student to use it. I just tell them I am here, and this is a way. And if you want to just have jump on there and say, hey, I got a quick question on this, and you don't want to do a face-to-face and you don't want to do a phone call, it's a great option. But like I said, it's not a requirement. I don't require the students to go out and make accounts there. So finally, closing up, I'm going to start with Zoom. Some things that I hope that you will learn either from me to pick my brain on, or things that I'd like you to set aside time to learn throughout this next summer and semester, is how to schedule and host a meeting, how to share your screen, and how to record the meeting, which could also be recording your screen, and then distribute that. How to utilize breakout groups so that in a class I can separate the class into small little discussion groups. I, as an instructor, can bounce into each one of them and kind of see how things are going, as well as use the integrated polling and reactions. They are not on by default, but there are some options for doing that. There's also plenty of external tools that you can use in a very easy way that don't require accounts for students, etc., that you can use in conjunction with Zoom. And those will come up in our tech tools discussions. A couple ways to use Zoom: hosting one-on-one meetings for advising, collaborating. You can have students create their own meetings to collaborate in group projects. Mentioned even the option of having them record those. Hosting virtual office hours, hosting empty meetings to record your presentations, streaming video content from your device, which can be some of those tech tools we'll talk about later, as well as perhaps being a back channel for discussion within the lecture. Final thing that I want to say when you're thinking about the LMS is you're going to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to change things, to revise things as necessary. Keep that syllabus flexible. Try to be as consistent as possible. And not make too many changes to the syllabus, but you can change the way that things are distributed, the way that things are turned in. You can say, oh, I did a discussion forum this week. I'm going to change the format of that, or I want to improve upon that. So constant reflection and revision is at the heart of good teaching. So that is the big overview of what an LMS does. A lot of times people will say it's your copy machine. It's your presentation board. It's almost your whiteboard, but not quite. But it's also the way that you communicate with students and help them to organize. So it's the landing page. It's the launch pad for all of the things that you do and engage with in the class. It's not going to teach your students. It's going to help you facilitate learning. So hopefully now in the next two videos, for those of you at Wisconsin College, we are going to, our next two sessions, we're going to be talking about how can I do the nuts and bolts of those things in my WLC? How can I do the nuts and bolts of those things within Moodle? Thanks for watching.